I want to talk right now about some of the things that a virtual machine allows us to do by virtue of its being not a literal machine. There are some things we can do in terms of moving them, copying them, um, even treating them as, shall we say, semi-disposable. Um, you can snapshot um, a virtual machine at a specific point in time. Now, this is particularly useful if you're doing something with a virtual machine that you know might not work and might also destroy the virtual machine. Now, say for example, say you're trying to deploy um, a vCenter um, software appliance into an ESXi host, and that vCSA um, is a virtual machine. If it doesn't load, you have to start over. If it loads and then you try to install it, uh, transition it from being a VM to being a vCenter appliance running on an ESXi host, and that doesn't work, you also have to start over uh, all the way back from initially setting up, unpacking, and instantiating the appliance. I know this because it's happened to me a number of times. The fun thing you can do with that vCSA appliance, after you get it booting, after you get it talking, before you try to deploy it into um, an ESXi host to use it on your vCenter network, you can snapshot it at that point. So that if something goes wrong, say for example the deployment fails, or oops, you don't have enough memory, or the network glitches on you in the middle and it screws the whole thing up, you don't have to start all over at square one for the umpteenth time. You can take a snapshot, and if things go sideways, you roll back. Um, this is kind of, we can sort of do this in the real world with critical save points, shall we say, on a Windows box. Say, for example, Windows ships a new patch on Patch Tuesday, and it really doesn't work. It really screws something else up. Oh, I don't know, Office stops working, or it falls off the network or whatnot. You can roll it back. Um, that's one of the important the ability just to save your virtual machine state at a specific point in time, so that if worse comes to worse, you can roll back to the last time it all worked. That's a very important thing to do. It's an important thing to be able to do. It's kind of like having a last known good configuration on a physical Windows box if it has stopped booting. We can also establish things called like non-persistent disks. If you want to have effectively a non-persistent disk on a physical workstation, you kind of have to have something like deep freeze, so that every time it reboots, it wipes whatever changes were made to the hard drive during that session. With a non-persistent disk, you more or less have the same thing, so that the changes to the virtual hard drive are discarded. Um, we can also do things like parenting and cloning. Um, Virtual machine parenting allows us to take a virtual machine, we'll call that the copy, and make copies of it. Those become the children. So that if you say need two practically identical virtual machines, you don't have to build you don't have to do the same thing twice. Say, for example, you need two ESXi hosts. They're going to be on the same network. They're going to have the same configuration, running the same operating system, etc., etc., etc. You can clone one, get into it, change it. You may have to do things like change the UUID of its virtual hard drive, but that's okay. If you create a clone from a parent and it still uses its parent state to some degree to determine its own state, that's what we would call a linked clone. What you can also do is take a VM and turn it into a template, so that it saves all the important stuff. It no longer runs as a VM by itself, but every time you need to make a new VM of that specific configuration, you roll out you grab the template, you turn it into a VM, you roll it. That's kind of how things like um, Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud works, EC2. You have a whole bunch of templates for VMs that you might want to make one of. And whenever you need to do one, you just spin it up. If you don't need it anymore, you throw it away. Um, we can also call these things molds, so that if you have the same VM that you're going to make not just one or two of, but 10, 15, 20 of, is like, say, you need to simulate, say, a Win 10 classroom, or a Win 10, or a Windows subnet. Sorry, a small Windows work group, something like that. You can spin up a whole bunch of clients at the same time without really fighting to do the same thing over and over and over again. Honestly, in this business, anytime you find yourself doing the same thing over and over and over again, it's time to think about automating it. Unless, of course, you know that, hey, this is literally the only time I'm going to have to be doing the over and over and over again, and it would take more time to automate than to just do by hand. So let's look at what this looks like in terms of parenting and cloning. So we've got our parent virtual machine on a server. We've got a physical server. We go through the network. We've got some linked clones. So the changes are being saved to the virtual disk. They all kind of look like this one back here. Now, one of the other things we can do, because these things are virtual, is move them. If you're using the same hypervisor, you can just kind of move the files from one place to another. Now, a lot of this depends on whether the thing is running or not. Now, if you're just going to move an offline VM from one place to another, you literally move the files, as long as they're running the same hypervisor. If they're not running the same hypervisor, you're going to need some sort of common format. Often enough, this takes the form of the Open Virtualization Format, OVF. OVF is the Open Virtualization Format. It is an industry standard. If you see an OVA, that's an Open Virtualization Appliance. It's basically a VM, but with fewer control options. VMware will actually support the migration of a running VM from one host to another. Now, you can't do this from VMware Workstation to VMware Workstation. You have to have ESXi host, and you have to have vCenter running to trigger the vMotion. So that what it essentially does, it takes the VM, it copies it to the new location, and it's running in both locations, and then it starts moving it. And when it's good and done, the old location goes away. That's kind of that's the 10,000 foot view of vMotion. There's a lot more to it than that, which we will get into later once we start talking about ESXi and vCenter and that sort of thing. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is network support and migration tools. Thank you for watching, and I'll be right back.